Okay, OTB Sports are in partnership with Science Week. Science Week is helping us explore the infinite possibilities science offers and the role of science in delivering solutions that support our future opportunities and challenges. It's taking place from the 13th to the 20th of November, and find out how you can get involved by visiting scienceweek.ie. One of the topics that Science Week are focusing on this year is nurturing the diversity, culture, and the arts. So there's a lot of, I guess, in topics within that area. So they're talking about linking in migration patterns or growing diversity as a country as well. And also how Irish people should embrace mehel, this Irish term for people coming together to assist neighbours, to volunteer and support one another. And I guess coming out of COVID, that's something that's resonated with a lot of people. And I thought who better to chat to than the former Mayo senior footballer David Brady. David was involved in some famous now phone calls over COVID and reaching out to elderly people and people that maybe were suffering from loneliness and isolation. So, David, thanks a million for joining us. And for people that maybe were unfamiliar with the story of the phone calls, you might just give us a bit of background as to how it all came about.
Yeah, Shane, and look, I suppose that the whole diversity, inclusion, and mehel and community probably was at its lowest ebb when we were all cut off from each other. And I suppose in regards to science, everything has advanced so much in the world, but I suppose verbal communication is still the epitome of how we communicate with each other. And we all lost that. And for me, the opportunity arose when a son of a man who was football mad reached out to me via Twitter and just asked me, look, would I make a call? Would I reach out? And would I spare a few minutes? And it was at the very start, I think it was April, around April time of lockdown. And I said, geez, why wouldn't I? And again, I made a call. I reached out and connected. And from that, I suppose it's still probably, if I'm true, it still continues today. That I suppose avalanche of what we needed. We needed people communicating. I was a stranger to all the people I called. They knew me as David Brady, the footballer, but I think we connected. And even up to last Sunday, I've been still in contact, and that communication has never ended with a lot of the people I reached out to. And I introduced myself as David Brady, the footballer, used to play with Mayo, and would you have a few minutes to talk? And again, that kind of, where did you get my number, and who told you about me, and your son, your daughter, your neighbour, your niece, your nephew. And from that, I had some of the most heartwarming, uplifting, positive, emotional conversations that I never thought possible, with just two people that would have never talked to each other before. And it was lovely. And for me, that whole mehel and community and integration of people were isolated and lonely, but I think we definitely connected, and I think that was an awful important thing to do. A small thing, but I suppose it cascaded from that it just, the numerous people just said, you know what, that's a very simple thing to do. Why don't I do it? And they didn't have to be an ex-county footballer or play for someone or be known. And I think it was a very positive time in my life, I have to say.
Do you think, and this is one of the things I guess they're talking about with Science Week as well, is developing these open, healthy, inclusive societies, engaged citizens as well? Like, do you think we as a country are good at supporting one another? I know when it comes to death, for example, we tend to be quite good at the immediate coping and helping each other out. But do you think we as a country, generally speaking, are good at that sort of thing?
Honestly, I think we are, and I think we've got a lot better for it. Unfortunately, it was due to COVID and that kind of circumstance of total isolation and being deconnected with each other. And as you said, look at funerals, and it's epitome of the Irish. When you need somebody and there is a call to arms, it's very important. I'd have always said I'm a great man for funerals, and that was lost again in COVID. there was none of that, none of the wakes or the coming together of a community or a parish. But it is very, very important, and it's passed on. That's the simplicity of it. It's passed on, and it's that ripple effect of seeing other people doing it throughout your life and other people giving their time. I suppose it's kind of, whether it's in a sporting or academic or a science background, you often see science teachers, helping people with experiments in a class, but never doing it for them, letting the pupils or the kids do it themselves. And I've probably experienced it through my life, people doing small things, but I'm going, that was a very nice thing to do. And they gave up their time and they showed people rather than told people. And that's for me a kind of lesson I've learned, that you do reach out, and when someone needs help, that offer, regardless of what it's going to be at your cost from a time perspective. And it's probably it's probably fitting enough in the last few weeks on the passing of Brian Mullins, Lord rest him. I had met Brian. Brian for me was an absolute hero of mine growing up in the 80s. I was an 8 or 9 year old, and I was either Brian Mullins or Jack O'Shea jumping off a wall thinking I could reach the skies. And Brian himself, got to know him over the years, especially on our final days. We'd have met and spent time with each other. And Brian reached out himself. And Brian, own unique way, he says, "Give me names, give me numbers, and I'll ring them." And he did. And again, people come back to me, "Oh, thanks so much." Brian Mullins ringing someone meant a lot more than David Brady ringing, but it was that kind of knock on, that probably the litmus of just doing something and someone else did it and passed it on and they did it. And Brian, Lord rest him, was a great GM man, but he knew he was very much in touch with people, and that for me just brought it back. You're going, one of the greatest stars of all time in GA, ringing me and saying, "Give me numbers, give me names. Who do I need to call?" And it was things like that. And unfortunately, still in the last few weeks and months, that people would reach out to me, and I don't know what it is. They would say, "Thank you so much for calling my father," or whatever, but unfortunately he passed away last week, and we really appreciate you calling him. And I'm going, "Jesus, it's a year, it's a year and a half ago, or a year ago, or 6," and I'm going, they still remember it, because probably at that time, when you're a son or a daughter or a niece or a nephew, probably going, "Jesus, I wonder what dad or mom are doing now at the moment," or they're in their house on their own, and Jesus, they're lonely or whatnot. But I suppose that hour, I think an hour and 52 minutes was my longest conversation, and it's past an hour out of 24, and we have good crack. And as I said to some of the people afterwards, "Look, I had a great conversation with your parent," or they told me things that they probably wouldn't have told anyone close to them. And it's just that opening up, and that making that connection. And from that, again, I just listened. And that's the most important thing, I suppose. I just listened. I would be a great man for yabbering on, but I just listened, and they told me stories about their life and their trials and tribulations and family. And yes, football was probably a common denominator, but it was never a mainstay of our conversations. It was about the lessons. And I suppose the science of life is very simple, that you learn from your lessons and the hard times and the good times. And for me, it was their stories that I'll always remember, and take lessons and life meaning out of.
And it's even like, I just listened to you talking there, you're thinking about this whole Science Week stuff, and nurturing nurturing our culture, I guess. And one of those things is probably getting those primary sources of stories from elderly people and people in the latter stages of their life. And look, some of these people would be, even if, whether it's talking to yourself or Brian Mullins, or talking even to their kids or grandkids, it kind of just highlights how communication is at the core of everything, in terms of passing along our culture and passing along these stories. Because without all that, then where would we be?
Oh, look, without a doubt, and it was even the understanding of people, that more often than not, was nearly for some people in their day throughout COVID was just a conversation over the fence or over the front gate of the house, and communities and people delivering the whole, messages from the pharmacy or from the supermarket, or, and even from a sporting context, people like TJ Reading that doing virtual training sessions for kids across the country, or just, it was, and again, so many forms of communication. But for me, it just boils down to giving some of your time or giving some of yourself to somebody else. And I think it is a good, and we've, there was so many tragic challenges and things that happened over COVID, but it's for me, it's one of the positives. And you're talking to men that was in their 90s. I'm transported back into a time. I'm going, just listen now, and the whole match day of one man, he was at the 1932 All-Ireland final, and I'm going, man above, and the walks for, I'm going to myself, I've listened to this all day, and that's what it is. And it's so vivid as well in their mindset, and who was with them, and how they traveled, and who played well, and this fellow was sent off, and we probably, man says, forget a lot of the things we learned in the books, but it's the way that stories are told, or the way that lessons are taught, that really embeds in the mind of people more so than what was in the words.
And I suppose in terms of the GAA as well, and it's fascinating to hear you talk about Brian Mullins' impact, and I know other former GAA players got involved as well, but like that's something that's at the root of Gaelic games, and it's such an important part of our country's culture as well, the Gaelic games. But communication, you nearly forget that at the root of it all, whether it's in a dressing room or the WhatsApp groups now or whatever, but communication is at the root of a successful team at the end of the day as well.
It is, yeah, and it's that's how you communicate, and sometimes we don't communicate very well, and you learn from your mistakes, or you're trying to get a message across. But to be honest, the most simplistic thing is just be yourself. And I think in today's world, maybe all of us, or some of us, are trying to be something that we're not, or trying to be something different, or trying to role model ourselves on something that's unattainable, or it's in a different universe, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or what's not. It's all you can be is yourself, and I think anyone that I've come across, and again, some of the communication, I remember ringing a man in Galway, and he was just about, yeah, fair play to you, thanks for ringing me, I'm not really a football man. And he said to me, you have to think to yourself, I'm a Galway man. So he was a hurling man, and I said, all right, and who's your heroes? And this man was in his 80s, and he said, I was expecting someone back in the 60s. He said Henry Sheffield, and I said, oh, fair play. And it was probably one of the shorter conversations I had. And it is that community, and I've met Henry over the years fleetingly. I said to Henry, there's a man in Galway I'd love you to ring. Would you mind? And that Henry ended up ringing this old hurling fanatic. And when his nephew came back and says, you don't realise what it meant for Henry Shefflin to ring him. And it just was that knock-on effect of, and no one is above their station in this country, whether you're the best footballer, the worst footballer, the best hurler of all time. It just was people reaching out to people in hard circumstances in a normal way, and that for me was the metal and the connectivity and that the GAA holds amongst people.
Yeah, geez, that's the epitome of it right there. Do you know?
Yeah.
One of the things, finally, David, just that that kind of struck me when I thought about the phone calls over COVID that you were doing was, and this is one of the things that Science Week are trying to talking about, coming together to like implement sources on Irish culture for new migrants and people coming to this country for the first time. Like, we're becoming such a multicultural society in Ireland now as well. Like, do you think something like this, like whether it be phone calls or just other methods of communication, could be used maybe to feel people of other cultures maybe feel more welcome in Ireland? Like it's probably, it could be branched out maybe and used in other ways.
Without a doubt, and we learn from our own cultural history of the past, where immigration was such a common day-to-day activity that people were leaving these shores left, right, and centre. We went to the Englands of this world and the Americas of this world, and we were welcomed for the greater part. And again, we are in that scenario where we're now the Céad Míle Fáilte. We're the welcomer to people that are in search of a new country or a new life. And I think I always see it, and I see it even here I live in Castleknock in Dublin now, and in Castleknock GA on a Saturday morning, there's hundreds of kids, hundreds. And I'm going, it's just like a swarm of kids at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning in a place called Chernanog, which is the land of the young. But I see that inclusion. I see that, and you know what? It's not about being able to. If you can see a child smiling, whether it's a little boy that's 6 or a little girl that's 6, just smiling and have a bit of fun and having a bit of joie de vivre on a football pitch. It doesn't matter what the sport is, whether it's soccer, basketball, rugby, tennis. It's you can see that just expression of, happiness and no worries, and it's very nice to see. And I think it's in our games, and from a sporting context as a small island, we're sport is embedded in our society and in our psyche, regardless of what grade or what level the sport is. I think it's a very opening and a very probably positive way to communicate with people, regardless of race, culture, or where they're from in the world. And I think that's give two kids a ball and they'll have fun in some way, shape, or form with it. And maybe it's a lesson for all of us that it gets probably too serious as we go on then in life, and it becomes all encompassing. But to take a little example of the youth and the young people, just to let them play and let them enjoy and let them integrate in that context.
Absolutely. Something we could all definitely learn from there for sure, David. Listen, thanks as always. I know that the phone calls are something that hopefully a lot of people have maybe taken inspiration from, and even though COVID's all but finished now, I suppose we can still continue these phone calls and conversations with people who might need them. So fair play to you, David, and thanks as always.
A pleasure, Shane, and thanks a million for having me.
Roseanne Kenny, Regius Professor of Medicine and Aging Research at Trinity College, Dublin.
Brilliant. Roseanne, thanks many for taking the time. I suppose we're touching on Science Week for Off the Ball and different topics on loneliness and social isolation. One of the topics that Science Week have chosen this year. So I guess loneliness is a fairly serious issue in Irish society, especially post-COVID maybe.
Yeah, we've actually, I'm involved in a longitudinal study on aging called TILDA, which many of the listeners may be aware of, where we follow a representative sample, 1 in 156 people over the age of 50 in Ireland every 2 years. And we've been doing it now for 12 years. And as part of that, we did a COVID wave. And we found actually that loneliness became almost 3 times more common during COVID. Even during the earlier stages of COVID, was associated with low mood, in other words, depression. It was as prevalent in rural as in urban Ireland, and as prevalent in men as in women, and certainly more common in people who were living alone.
And I suppose these studies as well, one of the interesting things that I noticed in the results, so they've shown older people feel generally disregarded by media, I suppose, and public health commentators as well, when they're speaking about these things. That can only heighten feelings of being a burden, I suppose.
I guess what COVID particularly showed was that older persons can become a very vulnerable and marginalized group in a catastrophe like the pandemic was in the early days, where we're all scrambling around under crisis mode. And during certainly the earlier period, there was quite a lot of ageist language and ageist attitude. For example, just having a chronological age cut off like 70, and strongly recommended that people 70 or older didn't go out, stayed at home. The implications of that was, because once you've reached that year, that number of candles on your birthday cake, you're not really of any value to society, or at least society can do without you under these circumstances. Whereas we know very well from our research and that of others that that's not the case, and that older persons contribute enormously to society in Ireland. Many are working, of course, at that. Those who aren't, there's a massive contribution in society in the context of NGOs. The vast majority of voluntary work is done by older persons. The contributions given to family members in terms of grandparenting and grandchild minding and child minding generally, in order to enable others to take part in the economic market, is also massive. So they make a huge contribution to society, and that implication was poorly received actually by older persons, according to our surveys. But also made it more likely that people would feel marginalized and out of context with their society.
That's something that you touched on as well. Funny that the number of candles on your birthday cake, and I guess the difference between biological and chronological aging is something that you've certainly looked at in the past as well.
Oh no, we're really interested in that, and it's actually fundamental to try and understand that. What's your real age? There's two ways of looking at age. One is chronological age, as you said, Shane. Chronological age is the number of candles on your birthday cake. Biological age is far more pertinent. That's really the age of your tissues, the age of your organs, the age of your cells. And why that's important is, first of all, it's much more relevant to your functional ability, what you can do, etc. Secondly, it's more relevant probably to the diseases you're likely to develop if you don't already have diseases and illnesses. And thirdly, it has implications for understanding maybe early risk factors that we can intervene on at an earlier stage to prevent any decline and maybe slow down the aging process. But some people, the biological aging starts very early on. There's one really lovely study to show that 4 participants in the study there were 1,000, all of them were aged 38 at the time of the study. They'd been studied since birth. And at age 38, chronological age 38, number of candles on birthday cake, the biological age varied from 22 to 48, even though they were all chronologically 38. So this concept of biological aging and accelerated aging of cells and organs and tissues actually starts very, very early on, which is why all of the factors we talk about in terms of slowing down the aging process and leading to a healthier, longer lifespan, they actually apply at much younger ages. I've done a book on this recently, and people say to me, oh, I gave your book to my mother or my grandmother. And I'm thinking, well, I hope you read it yourself, because actually we should be starting these interventions in our 30s, really, to ensure a longer, healthy lifespan.